Hi everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video we will start adding the final level of details. We will sculpt some additional smaller shapes on the head, for example. We will sculpt some shapes between the scales so that it looks like they are interacting with the body, but we will not finalize the high details in this video, because in another video I show you how to create your custom texture brushes. And in the video after this, we will use these brushes to create an extra level of scales and skin details. Alright, without further words, let's get started. Alright, to get started, we will join the legs using the sculpt tools and the union option here. Then I hit slash and let's quickly smooth this area here. I enable dynamic topology. Symmetry I set back to X, and the resolution, let's put it down to 60. Alright, that's enough for this step. Then let's go over to all the details on the face, like the horns, the teeth and the tongue. Let's select this stuff here, increase the subdivisions, and using the Sculpt Tools add-on, I hit Apply Mods, so all the modifiers will be applied. So for the final resolution of all these objects here, I want to use 200 as resolution. So I select this object here, and either you do it in sculpt mode using dynamic topology, this detail flat fill, or you use the Speed Sculpt add-on. So let's hit this button here. Now we have a very high resolution here. And now we disable dynamic topology, and then we can sculpt quite smoothly on this area here. I just use some clay stripes as starting point to add this interesting shape to these horns. I set a clipping border with Alt B, so the rest of the body is not in the way. Then I use the crease brush to add some additional details or increase some of the creases. And now let's create let's call it destruction brush. This one we will use for the body later on as well. So let's select the sculptor brush, hit the 2 button, then this will be copied. And let's call this one destruction. I just have no better word for this. If you have, just call it whatever you like. And now you can see we still have our standard sculptor brush, but now also this new brush. Then I go over to texture, hit new, also call it destruction, go over to texture, and here we use the procedural clouds texture. Then we go to color, enable the ramp, and move the one handle to the right and this one to the left, so that we just have a few dots on here. And now, as you can see, we will use this texture on our brush. If I scale this, you can see it on the brush. Now if we enable subtract and sculpt over here, you can see we add these interesting shapes. But for making this a little bit more interesting, we enable area plane, wake and random. And if I now add this here, you can see we have this random dots. So, but I take them away again, press Alt B to remove the clipping border. And for this stage, I disable the X mirror because I want to have different details on both horns. What you also can do is go down to the stroke settings and increase the spacing. So you can draw and have a little bit space between the dots. So not too much, because this should not look like cheese, just some details. Now let's select this horn here, same thing as before, detail flat fill with 200 resolution. And let's do the same thing quickly. And if we like, we can shortly enable dynamic topology. In this case, it's still enabled. And with the blob brush inverted, we can take some geometry away down here. So like we have a little broken part. Something like this. And it's really important that the details on the creature are not everywhere the same. So next step are the teeth. Let's apply the modifiers here. Same thing for the teeth down here. Okay, in this case we will not flat fill them because this will look very ugly. So, and basically I don't want to sculpt on every teeth right now. I just want to break some teeth. So same trick as before. Let's use a blob brush and let's add some broken parts here and there. And also symmetry is disabled so that we have different parts broken on both sides. So I think the clay stripes brush also works pretty well. Let's switch over to the tongue. Increase the subdivisions here and hit apply. Now let's isolate this, go to sculpt mode, and we start with a crease brush. But in this case we enable the mirror function, and let's quickly flat fill this. And now let's add this line in the center and some bumpy areas around here. So here we can also use a nice trick. For this I will select the Sculptor brush, copy this once again, and I call this jittered dots. Now let's increase the jittering, the spacing, and enable the radius pressure sensitivity. And now let's disable symmetry. And as you can see, now we can paint this jittered dots all over the tongue. And I disable the symmetry so it does not look the same everywhere. So then I use a crease brush, duplicate this and call this sharp crease, because here we will change the curve a bit. Let's select this one and delete this dot, and this one we move quite over here. Or maybe we can move this up here. And now you will see that we have a much sharper line here. And with this line we can basically add some scars to the tongue. Well, I don't even know if this is possible, but yeah, this is a creature and maybe it's quite old and has some fights behind it. So also the tongue is not super clean anymore. So, and when we are posing the creature, we also can pose the tongue so that it is showing in a different direction. But one last thing, we can look under this tongue, so we have to edit this stuff as well. In this case, we can enable symmetry again, and let's use the standard Sculpt Draw brush and add some geometry down here. And if this is getting slow, simply disable dynamic topology, then you can sculpt much smoother. Then let's disable mirror and add some veins here. Maybe we can pull this down even more. I think that's enough for the tongue. So let's select the skin thing here, flat fill this with 200, and add the final layer of details here. So let's go down to the claws. Here we do a similar thing as we did for the horns here. Let's flat fill this and at the same time apply the modifiers. And now let's sculpt the details, and in this case I use symmetry and I disable dynamic topology, so this will work a bit smoother. So now let's add the final touches before we use textures to create scales and skin and final fine details on the surface. So what I mean is, especially on the face, we didn't sculpt any of the features here. And I think in this stage, let's disable all other parts here. I will finally join the legs with the main body, because now we want to define the very fine details, and here certainly we want to sculpt over this area as well. And since this is just a static sculpting we do here, we don't need to pose these legs that much. So I think this will be fine if we join this. So let's select both objects, and with the Sculpt Tools Union, let's join these together. Now let's go over to Sculpt Mode, enable Dynamic Topology, X Mirror, and now let's smooth the transition here. Oh, and the resolution is still too high. Let's use a lower resolution here. Alright, now the legs are finally combined with the creature. So, and as mentioned, if you sculpt on a very high resolution mesh with dynamic topology, this can be quite laggy. So we will now flat fill the whole mesh with 200 resolution and then disable dynamic topology, and this will be the final resolution for this creature. Let's flat fill this whole thing, and then we can go to the final details. Depending on your system, this flat filling can take a while, but now the whole mesh is flat filled, and inside Sculpt Mode we now can disable dynamic topology. Since we only will work on the small details, we don't need dynamic topology anymore, and as mentioned, this will also slow down the speed. So dynamic topology is disabled, and we now can start sculpting the final details. Well, on this concept art I don't have that much details, but let's just take a look at another reference image. So this skin stuff here and the scales we will add with a texture, but this stuff here, this is what we also can do right here. So before we do the sculpting here, let's smooth this whole area with the smooth modifier. Repeat this by 10, and I think this looks fine. Then hit apply, and then let's switch back to Sculpt Mode. Yeah, now let's just get into some details, especially in these areas which are the main focus, like the face, for example. Especially the area around the horns should be adjusted, because there we did not do anything until now. And in this moment I still sculpt with symmetry on. So one thing we also should do at this moment, we should enable the scales, because we want to integrate the scales more into the body. And this we can easily do using the Sculpt Draw Brush, for example, and then go between these scales and add some geometry there. And then this will look much more integrated into the body. So here we can also use the Sharp Crease brush to add some extra sharp lines. With the Blob brush I add some eyelids here, pretty simple. If you add this hole under the teeth, you can see that they will look much more integrated into the body. I just use a standard Sculpt Draw brush and invert this brush. Okay, let's quickly hit slash on the numpad and let's add some details to the inside of the mouse. I use a clay stripes brush and just draw some stripes here. So something like this. Hit slash again. Now let's select the jawbone here, and with the Speed Sculpt add-on, let's flood fill the mesh with 200 resolution. And now let's basically add the same details that we have up here. So sculpt mode. Now I select the body again and let's add the additional shape between the scales. We already did it on the head, as you can see, but now let's also do it on the rest of the body. So I guess this will take a while, so let's speed up this thing. Alright, I'm through and I think I will keep this as it is for now. Alright guys, as you can see we are now getting closer to the final detail level of our creature, but there's still some nice details missing, and how we will create them, let's take a look in the next videos.